We are here with Steve. If you don't know Steve, you're missing out, dude. Steve's a nice guy. His band Tigerwine has a new album coming up. It's Toil and Toil and Spin?
Toil and Spin,
Yes.
that's
I almost said Toil and Soil, but that's not right.
right.
Uh,
Hey, that's not bad either.
no, not at all. It's coming out on Tooth and Nail on October 25th. So the first, thank you for joining me tonight. I greatly appreciate your time and the music that you guys put out.
Well, thank you for having me, man. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Um, my first question is going to be the most difficult one, um, and I hope you know the answer. I'm pretty sure you do because you're in the band. What kind of physical copies of Toil and Spin are you guys going to have?
We are going to have we have vinyl that is available. If you go to our Instagram, we have a link in our bio, which is where it's the only place you can get it right now.
Okay.
Uh, and then we may have a super limited run of cassettes.
Oof.
And I'm talking like 25, like just for giggles. So we'll see if that ends up happening, but I think that's happening.
Okay. I feel like a lot of bands are doing the cassettes right now. Like it's the, I don't want to say it's the hot thing, but it's the hot thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It just something fun to have, especially in like a digital age. It's like any kind of physical media you can have now. I think is becoming more special. I hear CDs are even some people are collecting CDs again, which I think is hilarious. But
Yeah, I know a lot of people who are like, I will never collect vinyl just because the expense.
yeah,
But like, so they do CDs and cassettes, but I'm the guy like if I like the band, of course I stream the shit out of it because that's I'm always on the go. But I
mm,
also try to have physical copies because I want to support the band.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, collecting is fun too. So why not?
Yeah, it's expensive though.
It
Jeez.
is expensive. Yeah, I remember way back in the day, and and when I was in college, I had a job that I like made pretty good tips at, and I would every single day. Hayden, the singer of our band, he and I worked at the same coffee shop, and we would just leave work and go dump all of our cash at the record store every single day. And like looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it would
Yeah.
have been so nice if I put it away. But now I've got records right in front of me right now. So you
Yeah,
know,
me too. I've got two shelves like they sit like this so I can
mm-hmm.
just see like I'm always like, man, I should listen to that. And then I go over there to grab it and I'm like, oh no, I want to listen to this one.
Oh yeah, it's hard to pick.
Never enough time. So when you guys went record shopping, did you like was it at the point where you were like, oh, this album art looks really cool. I'm gonna buy that and hope it's good?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, and I more often than not, I feel like records would end up being awful that
Yeah.
that you end up buying just based off the cover. Well, no, there's been a couple happy accidents, but yeah, back then it was just thumb through whatever you can find, and then even the record store would have just certain bands like I remember I don't know if you're familiar with the band Low,
Hmm.
but I had never heard them, and for whatever reason, the record store by our coffee shop just had tons of Low records. It was like their entire discography. So I was like, all right, it's available. We'll just buy that, and that ended up being awesome. That's a band I still listen to this day, and so yeah, it was funny what you could discover just by what was available. You didn't really go hunting for it; just kind of came to you, and so that was always kind of exciting, especially pre. Even back then, that was Spotify was in its infancy, so you still had to go find records and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. For us, it was always like this was like pre-internet. God, I'm old. Yeah, you go to the store and you're like, man, that cover is really cool, and then you take it home and you're like, oh, that sucks. Like,
yeah,
I'm
yep.
gonna give that to someone. But now I've got a really good collection that, of course, spans, I would say, close to 100 years of music. I got
Wow.
stuff from the 20s and 30s, uh, of the 1900s to, of course, I just got a record today. Shh, don't tell my wife.
So yeah, secret safe with me. Are you
Yeah,
talking like you have records literally from the 20s or just were
yeah.
recorded in the 20s?
No, I've got records
Wow,
from the 20s. Yeah.
that is awesome. That's
My kid
incredible.
my kids are like, why do you do that? I'm like, well, when I die, you guys can either keep them or you can sell them, and like
Right.
you'll be grateful I did it. And they're like, but they're not going to be worth anything. And I I pulled up my like appraisal of my current collection, which was like 2 years old, and they're like, really? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
You're like, this is for your college kids. You'll see.
yeah, yeah. Well, this will buy you a house probably.
Yeah, that is awesome.
It's so crazy. So walk me through the writing process of Toil and Spin. What like when did that start? Because I asked that because you guys have like 4 years between your first album with Tooth and Nail and this one.
Yeah, we so our last record came out in May of 2020, and we had a whole year planned out of shows and tours and all kinds of things, and obviously screeching halt there with COVID. And so we, man, probably about the end of 2020, I'd say. I think that winter I invested in some recording equipment because up until this record, we've done every single kind of. We'd always write in a room, and we'd never have proper pre-production. I mean, we our first record we went to Glow in the Dark Studios in Atlanta, and we had voice memos of us playing live. You know, and they were just terrible. That was like all the pre-pro we had to give, and then the next record we did the same thing, which is probably well, not even probably. I know it's probably very annoying for the engineers and the producers, but for us, it was kind of exciting because it was like we wouldn't hear the final draft of the song. I wouldn't even hear vocals on the song until we recorded it in the studio. So it was kind of fun to live with just the music itself, and then to see it kind of come to life with vocals and things was super exciting. But this time, just with COVID being in full swing and the interest in getting into recording and stuff, I was like, well, let's just see what we can start doing and demo out ideas. And we were also our drummer. We're from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Our drummer is from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Pittsburgh. And so he and his wife ended up moving home in 2020 or 2021. And so we kind of had to figure out a way to do it through the internet and be able to share ideas back and forth. So I just started demoing out tons of stuff. And then Hayden, our vocalist and the other guitar player, he got a recording rig as well, so I could send him ideas and he could throw vocal ideas on it and send it back. Even though we only live 10 minutes from each other, but still, we would just send it back and forth. And so this time, that's a long-winded way of saying this was much different because we kind of got to live with the songs for, you know, 3 years, or I guess it was 2 years until we recorded them. And we ended up writing like 25 songs or something like that, which normally it was
Wow.
like we squeezed out 10 songs and that's what went on the record. And so this time, you know, we got to chop things out or just be like, you know, this isn't working. This doesn't fit the vibe of the other songs, and kind of get to examine it that way. So we got to be more persnickety with that process, and it just took time. And but we ended up recording. The record's been done for probably a year and a half ago. We finished recording it, and then we finished mixing it probably 6 months ago. So it's been done. It's been tracked for a while, but now it's finally seen the light of day. Just getting all the last final mixing and mastering stuff dealt with.
Yeah, so like Toil and Toil and Spin versus the first Tooth and Nail release.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the writing and recording process, how do they compare? Like, do you feel that as a band, it's more cohesive without the voice notes and doing it like I'll say a more professional, like pre-pro kind of deal with it?
You know, yes and no. I think there's kind of a different element to it. We made both records with my good buddy Jeremy Worst, and so we did the first record at his studio in Lincoln, and he now works at a studio in Kansas City called B24. And so we did the thing that I like about the kind of going in without pre-pro. Um, it forced us, like a lot of what we would do, we'd incorporate like a lot of feedback into our tracks and stuff like that. And like because we had heard it live for forever, we kind of wanted to capture a little bit of that element in the recording. And this time around, it feels a little bit more polished in that we got to be way more deliberate about everything. And you think beforehand, like we haven't heard like so a lot of these songs we actually hadn't played in a room together by the time we went and recorded it. And so because they got to live in our heads instead of feeling what they're like in a room, we got to kind of lean more into the production aspect of it and say, hey, it'll be really cool if we do this drum room sound, or we could do this crazy vocal effect, or we could have, this reverbed vocal thing. So I think it ended up making it a little bit more cohesive in that we got to kind of decide what sounds were going to happen on the record beforehand, and then anything extra we got to throw on there was just icing on the cake. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Like, and that's why I asked that, because it's as I think as a band grows, whether you've been together 10 years, 30 years, 2 years, whatever, you learn things in the recording process. And when you're changing that and going from, the voice notes on the phone to actually like, well, when we demoed stuff, we actually recorded it and we were sending it back and forth. Songs change and you're like, oh, I like this. And you have more time to pick and choose, and it's not just,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. This time too, it was kind of cool because Jeremy, who produced and mixed the record, he's one of my best friends, and he's like the fifth Beatle, as it were. And so it was kind of nice because I got to punish him for 2 straight years with like, hey, what do you think of this song? What do you think of this song? And so we got to do a lot of the heavy lifting of refining the record just as life went on, instead of like, hey, we're a week before we're going into the studio. Here's the songs. What do you think? And so he got to say, if he thought a song was terrible, he could just fire back and be like, you could do better. And then I'd be mad for 2 days and then go, oh, he's probably right.
Yeah.
And go and change it. Yeah.
It's nice to have someone that you have that relationship with that's not gonna essentially like sugarcoat it and just say, hey, listen, this you could absolutely do better. When you have that friendship,
Right. Yeah.
It seems to open up a lot of doors musically, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think if you get to a point with people where you can check your ego and not be hurt, because everybody wants to, we would always say like, let's make the best thing possible. So if you're, if somebody raises concern about something, it's like, all right, like, let's test ourselves and see what we can do better. Like, you and I, before we started recording this, you were even talking about that song Contra.
Yeah.
And that was a completely different song probably 2 weeks before we went into the studio, and Jeremy and I were listening to, we were on tour together with a different band, and he was like, you know what, man, I think that's the only one that I just don't know about. I don't think it's working. And so 2 weeks before we went to the studio, I went home and rewrote the whole thing, and it was for the better. But yeah, you have to get to that point where you have to make a choice. It's like, well, I can either be upset and like, take it personal that somebody didn't like my art or whatever, or you could go, no, this is a person I've been friends with and I have a rapport with, and I can go, they want what's best, I want what's best, let's see what happens. And it ended up being, I think, for the better. So
Yeah, well, that song specifically, obviously I haven't heard what it started out as, but I think what it finished as is fantastic. Like I said, that opening guitar just like it grabs you, and I'm like, holy shit, that is so,
that's
excuse
awesome.
the language. I'm like, it's super fucking cool. Um,
Dude, I appreciate that. Thank you.
but the ego in any business or any art, I think the ego is the hardest thing to deal with, and being able to check it is, you know, putting it in its place. Of
Mhm.
course, I think there's a healthy amount of ego, but when it starts getting in the way of, well, my idea is the best, regardless,
Right.
like now you're really gonna hurt the art and what we're going for.
Right, and it's a push pull thing too, because there are other things that, like, somebody would say like, hey, I don't think this is working, and then you go, no, trust me, I've got it's gonna work. I got a vision for this, and then you end up being right, and so you hope that happens more
Yeah.
often than not, that you end up being correct. But it's funny, you get to the end of the process and you get to look back and go, cool, we were right about that decision. Maybe we were wrong about this one, but it maybe it didn't matter as much or something like that. So I think that just comes to with getting older, and you kind of uh, hopefully you become a little bit less precious about what you're doing, and you get to kind of like, maybe it becomes a little bit less of your identity how something goes or something like that, and then you can
Look, yeah, you really like try to look at what the goal is versus what you want personally, because
yeah,
it's the sum is of course greater than the one part of it.
yeah,
So
absolutely, yep, yeah, I completely agree with that.
so how long have you been working with Jeremy? Obviously he's like one of your best friends.
Yeah, uh we made the last record with him. I think we went out and demoed with him in, it was I think it was 2018. We went and recorded with him. He had a studio, like a garage in back of his house that he had made into a studio in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so that was just totally on a whim. We were on another record label at the time, and we hadn't heard from them in months. They kind of fizzled out, and there was a whole weird bit of drama there. And so we were still technically on that label, but we financed the record ourselves, and we're just like, all right, let's see what we can do. And so Jeremy had just moved back from California, where he was working in the studio, and just through mutual friends, we heard about him. We were like, all right, let's just go see, because it's only 8 hours from Colorado Springs to get up there, so quick weekend trip, and we just hit it off immediately. And and then we've been in constant communication. And then I live in Colorado Springs now, but I moved to Kansas City to go work at that studio with him for. We were out there the last year and change, like year and a half or so. Um, and so it was kind of fun. We recorded the record. I ended up moving out there. I helped prep the record, helped tune some vocals and stuff. So I've kind of gotten to be, along with the process the entire time, which has been very, very cool. And have never spent this much time on anything musical in my life,
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've just been joined at the hip, and he's been a close friend of everybody else in the band that whole time too. So it's super special to have that kind of working relationship with somebody.
Yeah, I think that's always really cool. Seeing bands who go in and it starts as just a working relationship. Excuse me, starts as a working relationship and then it ends as like, man, this person was super cool, became like another part of the band, on the engineering side, and to to see what comes of that. I I look at like Metallica and the relationships they've had, seeing the sounds that were brought out by even Bob Rock or Rasmussen or
Yeah,
whoever. It's really cool to see that like growth.
yeah, absolutely. And even getting to work in that studio with him, and you have all kinds of different people coming through the door, and it's amazing how much the vibe of the recording session can alter the sounds, and like,
Yeah.
if you have people that like even like philosophically agree, just like, this is what we believe we need to be doing. We're not trying to cool guy each other here. We're not trying to copycat anybody. We want this to be our own thing. Like, that's a super special relationship to have, and it's hard to find too, because there's so many opportunities when you make a record to just phone it in and be like, cool, we're going to do this exact same trick that X producer did. We're going to rip off this part of the song because we know it's going to be the path of least resistance, yada yada yada. And to have people that you trust, that you can kind of check that at the door with and be like, no, let's pull back and do what's right for the song and stuff. I think that's just awesome and that's super special. And that's why we'll continue working with Jeremy forever, because we've got that
Yeah.
figured out, Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't want to have to
Well,
go through finding someone like that,
and I think the other side of it is it goes from being like, oh, that's a really cool song to, man, the whole album is just great because you you have there's a cohesiveness through it
Yeah.
all, that the popular stuff, what I don't listen to a lot of popular stuff, so I don't really know, but all I hear is like singles. I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fan of singles. I want an album that I can put on and I can listen to it from start to finish. And there's not a
Sure.
point where I'm ever like, man, I want to skip this song. Like it,
Yeah.
and you find that more in the underground bands, the bands that aren't, all over, well, not MTV anymore, but you know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yeah. 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 And like, even to speak to that, it's funny. I think a lot of that gets shaped by limitation. If you don't have unlimited options or unlimited time to make a record, you have to just make these choices right then and there, where it's like, we could sit here for the next 4 days figuring out the quote unquote perfect guitar tone or the perfect vocal take or whatever. But it's like, budget wise, time wise, everybody has jobs. It's like, you've got 2-3 weeks to bang this whole thing out. And yeah, and I think for a lot of underground bands, that's something super special that ends up happening, because it's like, look, this is the drum sound of the record, because this is what we have time and budget to accomplish.
Yeah.
And this is the guitar amp, because and nowadays it's a little different because everybody has computers and whatnot, and they can do amp sims and all that stuff. But it's like, you look at some of these iconic records from back in the day, and they're using, it's like, some, at the time, some $200 PV amp, and it ends up being the whole sound of the record. and
Yeah.
and it's kind of interesting. And now they're like iconic sounds or whatever that people try to emulate. But yeah, I think that limitation is kind of what makes things special sometimes, if that makes
Well,
sense.
yeah, it absolutely does. And I think, another thing that really feeds into that is where like home recording has really come from. Like it's progressed so much, went from, you record on your little analog 4 track and you're bouncing
Mm-hmm.
tracks and hoping to get it right. And, to now you download something to your computer and you could literally any sound you want. You want your guitar to sound like drums, you can
Yeah.
totally do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. And that was kind of a funny part about making the record, or at least doing, like, writing the songs. It was funny because I didn't have capability in my house. I love real amps so much, but I didn't have capability of recording them. So, I'm pre-proing these songs using whatever cheap amp simulator I can get and stuff like that. And it was interesting. It could have been my inability at the time as well, but it felt so sterile to me compared to using real amps and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so when we made the record, it was a very conscious decision. Like, we're not touching anything fake. So it's all real amps, all real drums, real, we got to run through real outboard gear and things like that. And so we got to do it kind of the old way, quote unquote. And that's the kind of stuff I love too, because that also in some ways locks you into certain sounds, because it's like, you can't spend hours and hours patching and unpatching and getting new things dialed in. You kind of find the stuff that works, and it becomes the sound of the record, like literally, physically
Yeah.
becomes the sound of the record. Yeah.
Well, and it's a lot easier to translate into a live setting too. It's like I used this amp. I know this is what that sound is. So
Yeah.
really easy, out on the road. So
Yeah.
there's no like, well, I need to have this modeler and all this,
Right.
other crap. But, and the other side of it, recording with real amps is, maybe I'm weird, but it gives a richer sound on the album versus, the sterile, like modeled sound, like, oh, we'll just make it sound like a 5150 or whatever. And
Right. Right. And it's funny. Yeah, I'm sure it's one of those things where it's like I swear it's better every time to have a real amp, but I'm also sure that some of those modelers I could probably do a blind test and I'd feel like a fool because I'd be like, I can't tell, but even if it's I've always joked, like my dad and I talk about this all the time because he's old school and he just thinks amp modelers are the devil. He's just terrible. But I will say there is something about, I think you stand in front of like 100 watt amp, and you have it dimed and like it just is blowing your hair back because it's, pushing so much air. The
Yeah.
mojo factor of plugging into a real amp, I think makes you play a different way than you would. Maybe maybe I'm making that up. Maybe I'm crazy, but I do think like you go to a show and you plop, you got 100 watt Marshall and it's the loudest thing in the entire world, and you put it on top of your 410 or your 412 and get ready to go. It's like it does a thing to you. We're just like, cool. We're about to kick people's teeth in with
Yeah.
how loud this is. So I think there is that element of it too.
I think so too. And I think that's it's probably personal preference, right? Because there are people who prefer to go out and have their what's wrong with my throat? Um, they prefer to go out and have their modelers. So it's just they know I can have a different amp sound for every song or whatever, but I'm
Right.
like your dad, I'm an old school guy. I I want to,
Yeah.
I want my face, I want to be punched in the face with a, guitar.
Yep. Yep. I'm the same way. I get it.
Yeah. So is there a song on Toil and Spin that really sticks out to you as like your favorite to play, or maybe not even favorite to play, but think it turned out the best, like post production?
Mm, I think there's a song called Perennial. I think it's the second track on the
Yeah.
record. And that one, I always like every time we put out a record, there's always a thing that there's a song that I feel like what Tigerwine exists as in my head. If I had to try and emulate a certain song every time or a certain sound, there's always like one or two tracks on each record where I'm like, okay, cool. That is exactly in line with the vision that existed in my brain of the band. And I think that song is probably closest to that. And I can't even really explain what it is. It's just one of those things that I think makes sense to me in my brain when I hear it. And knowing our musical influences and where we want to go and where we're coming from and the types of things we quit doing and the types of things we started doing. And yeah, so I think kind of that one has a lot of really pretty sounding guitars and then
Yep.
really heavy guitars kind of. So I think mixing those two sounds is always kind of a challenge to do without it sounding kind of cheesy, because I never wanted to feel like, oh cool, the distortion kicked on, or now we're at the heavy part of the song. I wanted to always kind of feel aggressive and heavy and then just have it take a shift tonally, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. um, and I think we did pretty well with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about the album. I think the album plays a lot into that, right? Is it you kind of always have the dirty guitars, not always, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And you have some really gorgeous guitars and some like heavy overtones on the songs, and it's like for me, it's like, oh, I'm cruising along with it, and then this heavy overtone just like engulfs me like a ghost, like, oh,
That's
I can
awesome.
ride with this.
All right, mission accomplished then. That's what we're hoping to do.
Right on. Uh, what goals or thresholds do you guys have as a band over like the next 12 months?
Man, funny enough, it's like we have, most all of us have kids now, and like life has changed so much. So it's like we'd love to tour if the right kind of stuff comes along. I don't know how much we can justify going and like killing ourselves in basements, and stuff like that, which I do love doing that, but it's just we have some obligations. But honestly, like kind of the funniest part about all of this is, for a long time, like just the nature of music and stuff, you get so wrapped up in how's the band doing, how are plays doing, how's our reach, are we making enough content, yada yada yada. And I think now it's mostly to keep having as much fun as possible because I just, you know, I see so many people that are in bands or doing music or working in studios, and it's just they're just drained with how many hats they have to wear right now. And my heart goes out to them because like nobody picks up a guitar when they're a kid or whenever they start playing and they go, man, if I just play this enough and get good enough at it, I can
I
stop
could,
playing it and post about it online all day.
yeah,
So I think mostly like I just we want to just keep maintaining like gratitude for the fact that you know we've gotten to do more than I think we could have ever bargained for with music, and it's not not like we're paying the bills by putting out this record or anything like that,
right.
but we always talk about how it's like people want to people pick up a guitar and they dream they can play one song and then they dream they could write one song and then they think about starting one band and playing one show and all this stuff and it's easy to get caught up in it. You don't realize how special it is that you get to play a show or make a record with your buddies or have these working relationships and stuff like that. So we're just trying to keep enjoying it as much as possible in whatever comes our way. If it ends up we get to go hit the road full time and it ends up being awesome, great. We get to just keep writing songs and being buds and hanging out with our families. That's also amazing. So
But, I think that's a really good, like, it's really good. I think that's a fucking fantastic, like, outlook. We want to write music and hang out and have a good time. Like, at, with that in mind, it almost takes away all the stress of all those things you just mentioned. Like, okay, I need to post 3 times today at 9, 12, and 5, and make sure I hit all the people. And one of them's funny, one of them's recording, one of them's a live shot or whatever that looks like, and all the business behind it. I mean, I when you start playing, you don't realize like what being in a band is to
mhm.
make it, right?
Yeah, and not to even I'm not dogging any of that because I also completely get it's like you on the flip side of that you go through all this trouble writing a song and recording and you're really proud of it and it's like why let it die on the vine,
Yeah,
try and get it in front of people. But I think just for where we're at and how we're wired as people, it's like I just none of us are salesmen. We're not built that way. We can't like push ourselves in front of people and just be like, here's what you need to listen to or anything like that. And on the flip side, it's like I feel like we have a lot of people that really uh there are people that really value our band too, and that's kind of fun to see. It's like we get people send us tattoos they get of our lyrics, which is like that blows my mind. But it's funny to think that you've had that much of an impact on somebody, and so that's the kind of stuff that's like I'd maybe take those 10 people that are really really into our band, then go viral for like a funny video or something, if that makes sense. But
yeah,
but I say that if we did go viral tomorrow for a funny video, I'd be like, awesome,
yeah.
perfect. So maybe I'm just full of crap, but
Well, not so much. I think, you really see the benefit in, let me rephrase that. I don't really think it's a benefit. You see the attraction in that connection with another human being, and that they're that attracted to something that you guys did collectively is, that feeling in itself is, second to none, really.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, and even like we've got a buddy of ours that we've become friends with over the years is from Israel, and he loves our band, and it like that just fries my brain that anybody outside of Colorado Springs knows who we are, let alone overseas in a completely different world than what I exist in. And he's very invested in our band. And it's just like, awesome. All right. Like that, that's way more than I bargained for. So I'm super thankful for that.
Yeah, well, and today, I think that's one of the great things about, like, the streaming services is you put a single out, or you release an album and it is instantly available worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, I remember the day, back in my day. I say that too much. God, I'm old. Um,
But you're not, not to interrupt you. Our first, uh, we've been a band 12 years, and our first EP, I don't think it was on Spotify immediately. I think like Spotify kind of started, if I remember, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I remember it had been out for a little bit and it was like download only or whatever. And then Spotify came out. We're like, cool, we're on this streaming thing. Cause I know it was available to stream before I actually had Spotify. Like I hadn't even
Yeah.
paid for it yet. So that's not that long ago. You know, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, but like I was recording 30 plus years ago. God, I recorded
Mhm.
my first album over 30 years ago. That makes me feel old.
That rules. That's awesome.
You know, like that, and that was in the day where it was like tape trading. Like I know Spotify gets a lot of crap thrown at it, um, because it doesn't pay the artist really well. But dude, back when we tape traded, the artist didn't get any money from those tape trades.
Hmm.
It was like we were totally pirating music and sending it out. Like you got to check this out, which
Right. Yeah. And as you know, my tone might sound like I'm railing against, having to make posts online or Spotify or whatever. But at the same time, that is why somebody in Israel knows what our band sounds
yeah,
like. So it's like, as much as I can be upset about it, it has also provided very, cool opportunities and things for us. So yeah, I'm
yeah.
completely unsure how I feel about it. It's a necessary evil, maybe. But
It's well, it's okay to be torn, right? Like there's good and bad with it, and it's like
sure. Yeah.
without that bad part, you can't really enjoy the good parts. Like someone in Israel just absolutely in love with you guys, which is,
Yeah.
aw- that's what you always want is raving fans, right?
There you go. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, in your years of playing, is there like a favorite memory for you from a live experience that is funny or just really blew your mind?
Oh man. I remember we played we were on tour. Well, we got to do a tour with a band called As Cities Burn, which for me, that band growing up was, a reason I even played guitar. So the fact that we got to go play with, like, tour with them was just blew my mind. Um, but I remember we played at in Atlanta. I think it was either I think the venue was Hell. I think it's like a three-tiered venue in Atlanta, and we were played in like the middle tier venue there. And I remember when we started playing, we had a really good show. It was awesome. But we looked up and there's people in the front singing words to the song, and that was the first time. I think that was the farthest we'd been from home where we saw people singing along to something, and it was just like, what in the world? Like, you don't expect that to happen, and that was super super special because you're just in a spot where it's like, man, we're on this tour that we never thought we'd get to be on, and then you play this show, you're playing well, which cross your fingers that happens every time, and like the sound was super good, and then you see people really having a good time. It's like, sweet, we accomplished the goal this time, and so that was super super neat.
That's always I think that's always really cool. Like so whether I like bands or not, I go to a lot of shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, one of one of my favorites was Godsmack. I need to preface this by saying I don't like Godsmack. Like
Mm-hmm.
they've never been one of those bands that I'd be like, I gotta go see them. But they were headlining Louder Than Life last year, actually.
Okay.
And I'm there with friends, and we're just hanging out, chatting, and Godsmack comes up, and to watch the crowd, just the crowd experience with that was fantastic. Everyone was smiling, people were dancing, they're singing, and I'm like, it doesn't matter that I don't like this band. I love the energy at this moment,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, and that's kind of the cool thing about it too. Like, I think it's fun to, like, you know, hanging out with friends and stuff. We like criticize each other's music taste and make fun of each other for liking whatever band. And it's all in good fun. But like, I remember a couple years ago, I saw Florence and the Machine play, and Florence and the Machine is not my cup of tea at all.
Right.
But people were having more fun than I've had in my entire life. Like, you look around and people are all smiles and dancing and stuff, and there is something super contagious about that. And I think of that show often because I was looking around, just like, man, like, this is really impacting certain people. And I think it's funny, especially in underground music, you kind of, I think there's a temptation to think that it is more serious than like pop music or whatever, that people are experiencing music in the underground indie level is like, no, this is more pure and I like it because it really speaks to this specific part of me.
Yeah.
But then you go to a show like that and you're like, man, these people are loving this. And you realize it's kind of the same, you know,
Yeah.
it's hitting them in a very unique way as like, you know, whatever band you go see that nobody else has heard of but you, that's special to you, you know. And like that's kind of an interesting thing to like, even just as a person in a band, it's like it's not really about, you know, it's not really about conveying to people what's in, you know, this like specific thing in your brain. It's like once you make a song, it belongs to other people. They say, you know, like once you write a song, it's not in your
Yeah.
hands anymore. You put it out, and it's like they're gonna do whatever they do with it. So you don't know how Godsmack is hitting, you know, whatever, how many thousands of people in that crowd. It might mean something so specific to each individual one of those people, you know.
Yeah. It was like 70,000 people. It was ridiculous, dude.
Grief.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. I was just like I was so blown away. But you know, it's the same way in the smaller venues too, right? You get in there and it's packed and people are just in love with it. Like it doesn't matter how good or how bad it is. Like if the crowd is really into it, I'll enjoy it. I will have a
Yeah.
just a great time. We actually went to Bourbon and Beyond this year, which is not my it's not my cup of tea. Um,
Mhm.
but there was this band, the Red Clay Strays. They're kind of a country band, I think. Um, they put on such a good show, and I like look at my wife's friend, and I'm like, man, they are good. She's like, they're not metal. I'm like, so, like that doesn't
Mhm.
mean you know, like
Yeah.
you know, so to you know to have that experience with someone else enjoying music across the board, I think is in my mind that's the best way to connect with people.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the opportunity to be taken by surprise at a band too is so awesome because, you know, and that you'll probably remember that band forever. You're like, man, remember that time we went to that show and we are just like had no expectation, then you left and you're like, wow, you know, I had a great time I didn't expect to. And I think that's what we're always hoping for when we turn on a record or anything, even a band you're familiar with. You know, you want to be like, if a band you love puts out a new record, you want to be acquainted with it and familiar with the sound, but then you also want to be like, oh, cool, I didn't expect that. I'm surprised by that. And that's what makes it stick around for you. And that's, you know, that's why
Yeah.
if you write the same record over and over and over and over again, people quit caring. And I think that's just the nature of the beast a little bit.
Well, I guess a little bit, but I feel like AC/DC writes the same album over and over and over again, and
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
you
I
know,
guess there is value to not overcomplicating it. You know, if you
yeah,
got don't mess with the formula as the Beatles, or not the Beatles, Beach Boys once
yeah.
said.
I mean,
Yeah.
but that's all part of it. And there's a place for the bands that constantly evolve. Like I feel like you guys have evolved to where you are now, which is fantastic. And then, you know, AC/DC hasn't evolved beyond, you know, beyond their like algorithm to or formula to put the song together and get it out. And they still rock, you
Yeah.
know. You know
Yeah.
what you're getting with every album at every show.
Right.
It's a good time, you know.
I guess maybe the difference with ACDC is they know if they stick to their formula, there's going to be a lot of dollar bills coming their way every time, you know?
Well, it's you know, especially I think Angus is what he's got to be mid 60s, late 60s now.
Yeah.
He's like, I can play these same three chords and do my kicks across the stage and I'm good,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
know. So for you, like what bands are you listening to right now that you think other people should listen to?
Ooh. There's a band called Color Revolt, which I I always say is the best band to never do it. They put out like three, or they put out an EP and two full length records, and I think the last one came out in like 2009 or 2010 or something like that. But they broke up by then, have a spotless discography. Each thing is perfect. It's like they weren't around long enough to get worse, you know. So they're awesome. I love gosh, I listen to a lot of Seeger Rose. I don't know if you're familiar with
Hmm.
them, but I
Yep.
love that band. That's kind of always that's been in rotation for me for 20 years at this point. So there's no changing that. But yeah, those two, I could if I had to just take two bands on a desert island, it would be Killer Revolt and Seeger Rose for sure.
Okay. Uh, I'm not familiar with Color Revolt, but I am familiar with Sigur Rós, and it's
Oh, buddy.
actually a friend of mine, one of my many friends that would share music with. I kind of not talked to him in a couple of years. Uh, he sent that to me one day. Uh, shit, probably 8 or 10 years ago. He's like, check this out. I'm like, oh, I keep trying to get him
Mhm.
to go to shows, but he's like, no, I'm gonna stay at home. I'm good. Like,
Yeah, not his speed for sure.
yeah,
I get that.
yeah, it's not for everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
how many with the vinyl do you guys have a limit on how many you're printing this time?
I think we've only printed 250 this
Okay.
time, so fairly limited. Yeah, yeah. They, certain vinyl plants, it's like their minimum is. It's actually hard to find a bit like something as low as 250. Sometimes a lot of times the minimum 500. So, but yeah, we just stuck with 250. It'd be awesome if we got to re up that eventually, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think you will. Like I feel like this album will be really well received. I mean, it so far, it sounds really good on this end. I think a lot of people are going to be really excited to hear it. Sounds like you guys have a really solid fan base that'll help push it out to more people also, which is like,
Yeah, I hope so. I certainly hope so.
yeah. Um, okay. Dude, Steve, I greatly appreciate you taking time out of your night to come and chat with me about the band. I'm super excited. I will probably be going to pre-order the album in the next couple of days, so I'm looking
Dude,
forward to.
thank you so much for having me, man. This was a blast.
Awesome. Well, man, go and have yourself a great night.
Sweet. Thank you, buddy. You too.
Thanks, sir. See ya.